This is a sekka hinoki. It's a form of dwarf hinoki, and I got a couple specimens last year that had uninteresting trunks, but they had a whole lot of branches, and I thought what a perfect opportunity to make a clump-style tree. So last year I started an air layer. I scraped away a layer of bark, and I packed it with moss, and then put it in a much deeper pot. And I'm curious now, a year later, if it grew many roots. So I'm just going to open it up and take a peek and see what happened. First step will be to simply dump out the soil and or take it out of the pot and really start poking around. All right. So until I really get inside and see where these roots are coming from, I can't know if it's time to separate the layer. One thing you can notice, however, is that we have lots of roots, and that I've used a couple different kinds of soil. I used a hayakadama mix up on the top here because I know that hinoki love hayakadama mixes, and I used a lot of pumice down below, which I knew would be on the dry side. And I didn't really want many roots to grow down below, and so it looks like I got exactly what I was hoping for. A bunch of roots up on top and not much down below. So to pick at this, I could use a root hook, tweezers, a simple chopstick. Doesn't really matter a whole lot. But I'm going to start by just laying the tree on its side and start just poking around to see if I can find the spot where I began that air layer. Let's see. There's a little bit of moss, which would have been right where this whole process had begun. And right now it looks like there are quite a number of roots up there near the surface, which could be great. These dwarf hinokis are fun. They're very popular in Japan right now, but you don't see a whole lot of them in the States yet, or rather the ones you do see tend to be in fairly early stages of development just because we haven't had a lot of growers who've been producing these for a long time. And so a lot of people are starting out with them now, and so it'll be kind of fun to see more and more of these kind of start showing up in exhibits in the next few years. I also don't necessarily want to cut any roots yet if I don't know where they're coming from. So for the time being, I'm just going to be combing out what I see, and just so I can try to figure out where the roots are coming from. But wow, that is a lot of roots. The sekka hinoki take cuttings really well, so they're pretty easy to propagate, and they also propagate well from layer. So those are kind of the two main ways to do it. You don't grow hinoki by seed typically because the whole point is that you want to preserve whatever characteristics you see in the foliage. You can see right here that we've got the original root base was down at this level. Those are the old roots down there, and we can see that almost no roots, very few roots have grown from the old root ball. And then we've got the original trunk, and then we've got all these roots coming out up high, which is just fantastic. I'm kind of surprised at how many roots grew because, as you can see, not a whole lot has grown on the top. I let this grow for a whole year without pruning, and there are no extensions at all, but clearly the tree was investing a lot of resources in producing new roots. The styles that are the most common for sekka hinoki in Japan are formal upright, by far would be the most popular, followed by clump style, followed by informal upright. What we tend to see the most of are informal upright because those are the easiest to grow if you're developing them from scratch. But I wanted to see some different options, and that's why I started this so that I could end up with a clump style. Now I see a little wire in here that I used to hold the moss in place, so I'm going to remove that. Now, interesting. So here's where we have to be careful. You can see precisely where I wanted the layer to happen was right along this line right here. That would have been kind of the perfect spot. I do have roots above that, but they're coming up way up high up near the trunks here. There are no roots coming from the cut side. So where are all these roots coming from? I'm going to have to investigate a little bit further. Let's see. So it looks like lots of roots are coming out from somewhere up in this area. I just don't see where yet. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of separate the roots that have come from above the layer and below the layer so that I know what I'm dealing with here. That's why I'm kind of working in the middle of the root ball. Wow, that is a lot of roots. Yeah, and so it looks like a lot of the roots are coming out right about the same level where the foliage is. I can see a whole bunch of roots coming out right here, right around those first branches, all the way around this side, all the way around here. Lots of roots coming out there. And then there's kind of a gap where we have one little tiny root. That was an old branch. A couple more roots on this side. And so now the question is, are these enough roots to keep all this afloat? And so I believe that yes, we do have enough roots to keep the top of the tree going. So what I'm going to do is separate the bottom of the root ball, plant it at this new level, and then I might assume that I might lose a couple branches in this area where we don't have roots coming out, but I'm not too concerned about that because we have roots all the way around that side, and that's going to be more than enough foliage and branches to work with on the rest of the tree. I'm trying to see if I can make this cut with a root cutter. It might take me a couple of cuts. Maybe I'll just try it to see if I can do it all in one go. And there we go. And so that is a separated air layer. So this is the bottom of the tree right here. And as you can see, the base of the trunk looked really good, but it wasn't a beautiful tree, kind of the way it was before. And I really wanted that clump style. And so structurally, the trunk went up, and then instead of tapering into a nice upper trunk, we had many, many branches emerging all from the same spot, which is why I wanted the roots up there. Were there a good distribution of branches that I could have worked with, and if the top of the trunk was prettier, this would have been a great start to a small tree, particularly a shohin. And the sekka hinoki are most popularly grown as shohin, as they provide really interesting foliar contrast to the other trees in a display. Now, the next thing I want to do is kind of cut away some of the dead branches down here so that I can tell what's alive, what's dead, and then get a sense about precisely what level I want to plant the tree at. And so I'm just grabbing the little dead pieces and removing those. Those are all pretty good roots. And so this makes me wonder whether or not I even needed to cut the trunk and do the ring because I didn't get any roots right where I'd cut, or if you just need to pack moss around where you want the roots to grow. I would have to do more experiments to find out if that's, or which approach is the most effective for what I'm going for. But that may be all I need to do for now, and then I can kind of plant the tree at about this angle right here, and then I can have all of those trunks coming up with one slightly more main trunk in the middle. I won't really worry about whether that side is the front, this side's the front, or even very carefully where the exact planting angle will be. I'm just going to try to get it in a shallower container so that I can start the training process out at this new level. So next step will be to prepare a container for planting, and then we can see about setting the tree at this new planting angle. All right, now that I've prepared the pot, we can put the tree in the pot. So again, here's our hinoki. I chose a training pot, and I put some screen on the bottom, and I put in some tie-down wires that I can use to secure the tree into place. Now I'm noticing that that's a lot of roots for this little guy. Normally I'd want to keep them all, but just this is a lot of root mass for this size tree. So I'm going to remove just the bottoms of these roots to give me a little bit less root in the pot. And that'll make it a little easier to fit everything in. All right, and then I can spread these out when I put it in there. Now, in terms of soil mix I'm going to use, I've been having trouble keeping my trees dry enough, so I'm going to use a slightly larger particle of pumice for the base. layer of soil. I'll put a little bit of that in. And then I'll put some bonsai soil mix with around 40 to 50% akadama above that, slightly smaller size. And so what I'll do is I'll put just a little bit of soil in as kind of a test fit to see how the tree sits in the soil. Spread out the roots a little bit. I'm going to want it to sit at roughly this angle, at roughly this position right here. Now, because the tree's bare rooted, that is, there's no soil in between the roots, what I want to do is pretty much set the tree roughly where I want it, incorporate soil in between the roots, and then I can tie it down. Because if I tie the wires down on top of the roots now, there's nothing holding it in place, and I can actually squish all the roots down there, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to start doing is adding some soil around this, and then I can start to use the soil in between the roots to hold the tree into place. In the meantime, it's just going to be flopping around like that. The soil particles are roughly between kind of 1/8, 3/16 in size, maybe up to a 1/4 inch at the biggest, but mostly a little bit smaller than that. And I have dusted it, that is, I sifted to take the dust out. And I want the trunks to be not straight up, but just a little bit off to the side. So kind of like that right there. And I'm going to use a chopstick to start incorporating the soil into the roots there a little bit. And I'm just going to do a little bit for now. And I'm going to do it all the way around, because if I work in any one area too much, you start moving the soil around it. And so I just want to start getting the soil into that bed of roots down in there. Now, as you can see, just doing that, the tree actually almost holds itself up. It's very unstable, but at least it kind of holds itself up. That'll make it a lot easier to work with. Now I can kind of double check from the front what I want to look at, make sure the level's correct, and then I want to use these guy wires to kind of wire the little bit of the trunk kind of directly where I want it. I'm going to start with the easy end and use these 2 wires to go just right over the trunk in this case, kind of in between these branches. By wiring to something that's a little more solid, I get a much more secure connection than if I had just run the wire over the roots. Eventually, when the roots grow in and thicken, I can do this differently, where you're actually just using the wires to hold the roots. But in the meantime, we don't have any roots, so we're going to just go straight to the base of the trunk. I'll need some pliers for this. I will twist that into place until it is snug, not super tight, but snug. And then that already makes it a lot more secure. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to look for a spot where I can get a good connection over the trunk, and I'm going to kind of thread the wire through the branches so that I can find a good space. I think I've got one right there. And then I can do the same on the other side, and then I can twist the 2 together, and that should get me a little more than halfway where I want to be in terms of security. And by security, I mean just holding it in place. Now, if you're looking, you can kind of see I've tried to get it roughly centered in the pot. And there's a little bit of movement there, but not a whole lot. So now that I have it basically in place, I can add a little more soil and do the rest of the chopsticking to make sure that the tree will sit better, stay in place where I put it, and to make sure that there is soil in between all of the fine roots. Once that's done, I will give it one more twist on the wire, and then I can just prepare the very top level. Now, when I find a spot where the soil just kind of disappears in there, I just kind of keep working in that area. And then when I've kind of filled in that area and it feels maybe not 100% all the way filled, but just about there, I will stop and move on to a next spot, because it's likely that the soil is so loose in this case that you kind of can't get perfect. In other words, there's no hard surface to which you're filling. It's all just loose soil that you're settling in there. And so I have a different expectation than if I had a solid root ball and was working with that. In this case, I'm just making sure that there's just no giant air gaps in between the roots. And so by the time I've gone, one revolution, that is, I've worked the roots all the way around the pot, by the time I get back to the end, then I'll be set, and I can just put a little more soil on top, level it, and then water the tree in. If there's a little hole into which a whole bunch of soil disappears, I can just grab another scoop, put it in there, and keep filling up that area. Having done just one of these before the previous year, my big takeaway so far is that within a single year, I tend to get lots of roots, but you don't always get the roots where you want them. And so I will have to report back when I find out a trick for doing that. But what's nice is that at least you can move forward with the development of the tree within a fairly short amount of time, which is great. All right, now the next step will be to simply level the soil up off near the top. I'm going to fill it up, in this case, pretty close to the top of the pot. I forgot to cut the extra wire, so I'll do that right now before I cover those up. Give them each one more turn. I'll pull it and then kind of take up the slack as I twist it back down. Kind of secure the tree against the pot. A couple taps. You can also do it both at the same time, front to back or side to side. And I could use either a trowel or simply my fingers to continue to level from there. In this case, it's pretty rough because the tree is just floating in place. But what's nice is it's actually pretty stable in here. And so I feel comfortable that just through watering and handling it, moving the tree around on the bench, I'll be able to keep it healthy. But this is essentially the work I'm going to do for the time being. I want to put the tree back in full sun, and I want to let it grow and continue to root in so I can kind of establish a good line of surface roots on the tree. And then once I start seeing more elongating shoots on here, that's when I know that I can start training the branches, selecting the trunks, wiring them into place, and then starting to train the branches. All right, that's it for this second hinoki. Thanks.